what's up? Today we're covering episode 5 in my series of book versus show for the Amazon Prime's The Wheel of Time. This one's coming to you slightly late because I literally just got back from vacation this morning, but it's never too soon to get into Wheel of Time. So let's get into it. Okay, so actually this stuff is pretty good as far as like plotline and information goes, like with Turok and Suroth and Padan Fain and the Horn. Like, we don't see it in this way necessarily, but yeah, like the information that's getting across is pretty good. Fun fact, their fingernails were painted blue, and I think their nails were shorter in the book, more like inches long and not feet long, but obviously making it more dramatic for screen makes sense. Moiraine with killing the horses, I don't know, like, I guess she's committed to her cause. I've just talked a lot about how Moiraine just feels more angry and intense in this show than I view her. Like, couldn't she make the horses run away? Maybe I'm just being a baby about animal killing, but it's brutal. Perrin definitely does resist who he is, and like the whole wolf brother thing, again, mostly happening in the first book where that gets introduced. Hopper speaks in his head, and I think I said that last time, I can't remember. So it's interesting how they are using the screen to communicate their growing relationship here. I think they won't have that much of a hard time because I think people naturally get attached to animal companions. So I think even though we are losing valuable information from not being able to hear Hopper, I think, the connection will still be shown. So Aviendha first appears in the third book, The Dragon Reborn, and actually first meets the girls Egwene, Nynaeve, and Elaine, and she actually asks Nynaeve to heal one of her traveling companions because she's with other Aiel. This whole thing is true, like she's looking for the Car'a'carn, which she says in the show, and they are traveling to a city, Tyr at the time. I'm not going to go into why they were traveling to Tyr because I have a feeling the show is probably going to go into that end of the Dragon Reborn plotline at some point. So yeah, my point being, she's never with Perrin like this. She's with Egwene, Nynaeve, and Elaine. However, Perrin does save an Aiel named Gaul from a cage, and Gaul says he owes Perrin a life debt. So it's from the books in that regard. Like, I think it's interesting that they just kind of chose a different character introduction with Perrin for Aviendha. Yeah, there's just some stuff that I thought was like good to point out. Like, yes, the comparison with the Shanshin and the White Cloaks here I thought was a good comparison of kind of how they differ in the books. And I thought it was a great representation of the Brown Aja. Dane is definitely not this nice in the book, in my opinion, but his storyline is involved with Perrin, so I think they're setting that up. So I think that's interesting. They're gonna keep that plot line. Okay, yes, I'm so excited. This is finally being mentioned. Tel'aran'rhiod. Oh my gosh, I can never say that word. Tel'aran'rhiod. Whatever, the dream world. I can never pronounce it. I don't care. Look at that word. Who can pronounce that word? So anyway, World of Dreams, one of my favorite parts of the book. Love everything with World of Dreams. And yes, Lanfear is really known as being like the queen of the land of dreams. She's the master of it. Fun fact, Egwene in book 1 is actually clocked as perhaps also having power or talent in that regard as well. But they haven't developed that at all yet, so I wonder if they will in the show. And then also Perrin, part of his wolf powers is being able to go into Tel'aran'rhiod, and so I guess that's a mild spoiler because they might develop that later, but you do know that as in book 1. You would have known that by now. Okay, guys, I need your help on this one. Is this Barthane's Damodred? Is that what he says? I just feel like the show is so quiet. I kept rewinding. I just cannot figure it out, and IMDb doesn't list who he is. So help me out. If it is Barthane's is actually a cousin, not a nephew. So Varen doesn't actually discover the girls are missing because Varen is with Rand for the majority of the Great Hunt, which I've talked about in previous episode. Also, you couldn't just like get signed out to visit family. That's not really how the White Tower works. But I mean, I know that in this, it's supposed to seem weird, but I'm just clarifying. Kind of nice that they finally introduced compulsion. So Liandrin absolutely does not help Nynaeve escape. As I've said, Liandrin and Nynaeve absolutely do not have a relationship in the books, so she would not help her at all. They only escape because Nynaeve goes postal, basically. Like, she calls down lightning and freaks out because this is the situation where Nynaeve would freak out because she was like scared and angry, and her and Elaine do escape, so like that's accurate. The only difference is that Min is actually with them at this point, and Min is captured with Egwene, but obviously Min doesn't have the power, so she's used as a leverage against Egwene to get Egwene to do what they want. Well, I mean, also with the collar, but well, anyway, you get what I'm saying. So yes, Ishmael is the head honcho of the Forsaken. Mat was not born his, but we've covered that. So I think this is Rima, and she has an Aes Sedai of the Yellow Aja in the book, but it's actually Egwene who meets her because Rima is collared and captured by the Sanshin, and she asks Egwene to like remember her name, and she's very broken. So I think it's interesting that they're introducing her in this plotline, but in a very different way. But I think it's great if they're going to do what I think they're doing, which is to kind of now have Nynaeve have maybe another mentor besides Leandrin, now the Yellow Aja, to complete that storyline. And I'll say this here, I actually think that's like would be very, I hope that's what they're doing, because I think that would be very interesting to see those two sides in Nynaeve. Like, I think that could be a very interesting development. Yeah, so like, yes, this is sort of true. I just feel like it's like there's slightly more to it. So Lews Therin leaves her because he feels like Lanfear is, okay, let me just say this. Lanfear has a million names. I'm just calling her Lanfear because it will simplify things. So he leaves Lanfear because he feels like she loves the prestige of being with him more than she actually loves him. And she's like very power hungry. So she also pledged to the Dark One, not just to like because she wanted Lews Therin back, but also because she wanted more power. And in fact, she kind of did a big oopsie back in the day trying to get more power. But I won't go into that because I'm guessing like where the show is going developing the villains a lot, that they might cover that information. So I'll leave it at that. Okay, so my overall thoughts is that episode 5, in my opinion, was a big improvement from episode 4. I didn't really like episode 4, and I enjoyed episode 5 a lot more, mostly because I felt like things actually happened. Like, I felt like plot moved forward. Like, we introduced a lot of information in episode 5, and it still feels like setup. Like, I get that. Like, a lot of the episodes feel like setup. But this felt like so clear to me, like, things are happening. We're meeting interesting people. And this is a setup for where things could go in the future. I do wonder if I disproportionately like episode 5 because I'm a book reader. So I feel like I notice all these things and it's exciting me. I'd love to know, if you're not a book reader, how this episode worked for you. Did it feel too much like an info dump? Did it feel like too much like a setup? I do like to know the differences on how we approach these things, and like if I am biased for liking episode 5 because of the book. And look, as much as I hate that they're not paying attention to Mat, look at how much better, in my opinion, this episode was that they ignored so many storylines. Like, that Mat wasn't in it, because I've been saying since the very beginning that I think they separated everyone up way too much, and it was not a good choice because we already have so much going on. The fact that they have to keep cutting to so many different people, I really believe they should have kept Mat with one of the boys. I obviously think Perrin makes the most sense. Now, you're like, but he had to leave, the actor. Look, they've already retconned a bunch of stuff. So they could have just retconned that, and I think we would have all been fine with it. We would have just gone along with it. They could have put like 2 lines explanation, because I do think the show has suffered from having to follow so many plots. And the funny thing is, until right now, I didn't realize that we did not hear from the Warder storyline at all. And oh my gosh, no wonder I liked this episode, because the Warder storyline has been so meandering and so long and getting nowhere that an episode without it, unfortunately, just feels so much better. I did not miss it at all. And again, I think it was a mistake to split up Lan and Moiraine, because that gave them another plotline that isn't doing anything. I think if they'd kept a few more characters together, it would have just been so much more cohesive, because this episode just felt like it moved along so much better because we limited storylines. Honestly, I'm gonna say it once again, most of my issues with this episode have nothing to do with the adaptation, but instead more have to do with like the sloppiness of the storytelling. Traveling was shown in season 1, and yet Lanfear is like using a horse and normal means to try to track down Moiraine and Rand. Like, maybe she couldn't use traveling, but like the power differentials again just aren't consistent, and I just don't feel like it makes a lot of sense when we're showing that kind of like instant travel, and then, you know, Lanfear can't even track them down and she's like supposed to be so powerful. There's also inconsistency in showing weaves. Like, Lanfear just like randomly did this magic and I don't think I saw any weaves on the screen. So again, you'd be like, well, they couldn't see it. Well, you just never know. Like, in the show, sometimes you can see it even if other people aren't there. Sometimes you can't. I just feel like it's inconsistent. Like, they didn't make a choice. I also can never tell where anyone is. I kept having to rewind and try to listen. Like, did they say where they are? Because I feel like all the city sets look really similar or very much the same. And so I have a really hard time figuring out like time and spatial, like where everyone is. And I wonder if other people are having that problem. Like, I know the things because of the book, and I still am really struggling to figure out like where people are. And so again, I think that's like sloppy. Okay, this next one's actually one of the ones that drives me the most crazy is that they kept this whole conversation between Liandrin and Sarath about leashing and collaring, like, someday you'll be leashed and I'll collar you and I can't wait to hold the leash. And they've literally never shown a collar or a leash this entire time with Seanchan. I can't even believe this. They have this weird mouth thing. Why didn't they just change the language to match what they were showing costume-wise in the show? But then later, at the end, Egwene gets collared and leashed? Like, I'm so frustrated because we were all discussing so much, why are they doing this mouth thing? And then they're just like, never mind. We actually decided we don't want to do that, but they're still in the show doing that, but actually we don't want to. Like, it's just sloppy. And maybe they're going to describe like they've graduated, but like the whole thing is sloppy. It's sloppy. Also, finally, timelines aren't timelining. Maureen said that Rand was with Lanfear for like 2 months. And I thought at least it was 6 months. But I'm like, Rand saying I love you after 2 months? Like, I get it. But people are going to come for me in my comments like, well, Rand is so young, and of course he falls in love so quickly. But I'm like, I just feel like you can't have both. They made the main characters way less innocent, and you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you're going to choose to make them way less innocent, then that's the choice you made. And I have noticed a lot over the 2 seasons that they are going back and forth on wanting their characters to be innocent or not innocent in a way that it makes it seem confusing that their characters aren't staying consistent. And I think it's really biting them in the butt with Matt personally. But yeah, so it's not about the adaptation and those things. It's about like sloppy, consistent show writing. My only adaptation complaint for this episode that comes from being a book person is just, once again, Rand's complete absence really from our storyline. Like, as important, like when you think the whole reason Padan Fain brings the horn to the Sanshin is because he's trying to lure Rand, and that's just so not present. And there's so many other little issues like that where Rand is supposed to be present and just really isn't. And it's funny because I wasn't someone who's really like a huge Rand defender, like, oh my gosh, Rand's the most interesting person in this whole series, like Rand. But the show is making me feel that way because Rand is the main character and he's in charge of a lot. And I just feel like he's literally a nothing burger in the show. And I do think it's overall hurting the show because the whole first season was about who's the Dragon Reborn and finding the Dragon Reborn. And then they're just totally ignoring it. And I just don't understand why you would make your first season suffer so much by making it a mystery. And then once the mystery is revealed, being like, well, actually, we're not that interested in telling that story. Like, it just doesn't make sense to me. Once again, if they had named this The Tower, things would have been fixed. Anyway, overall, I thought episode 5 was a great step in the right direction. I still think we're moving too slowly. I don't think this should have been episode 5 out of 8. This feels like information that could have happened like in episode 3 if we had just kind of like moved the story along. That's my personal opinion. I think we have a lot of ground to cover in the next few episodes, but I will admit this one kind of was like, okay, oh, we are getting somewhere. So it kind of enthused me again for the show, which feels nice. I do think it'll probably be too little, too late for many book readers who've already given up on the show. I get that. I think it did a good job in this episode of mixing book stuff with how you would do a show. So I'm pleased with that. Tell me what you thought about episode 5 in the comments, especially if you're not a book reader. I'd love to know. If you're like, no, this episode didn't work for me at all, this is clearly like a book knowledge thing, I always like to know those differences. And always, if you like these kind of videos, please like and subscribe, especially if you want to see my other episodes on Wheel of Time. And I will for sure be doing a season wrap-up at the end of the season. And you can always follow me on Instagram if you want to see what I'm reading, other nerdy rants, or if you want to know if my videos are going to be delayed because I was posting about why this video would be delayed. So if you want to know that, check me out on Instagram at bookborn.reviews. And I'll see you next time. Bye.